In the news tonight, His Majesty receives an invitation from Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to visit Cairo. Human rights groups petitioned the Israeli Supreme Court against a new law legalizing settler homes in the occupied West Bank. And the top U.S. commander in Iraq says he believes U.S.-backed forces will recapture Daesh's last two major strongholds in Syria and Iraq within the next 6 months. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, welcomed families of martyrs of the armed forces and security agencies who fell in the fight against terrorist gangs. During the meeting at Al-Husseiniya Palace, attended by Her Majesty Queen Rania, King Abdullah voiced his pride in the heroism of the fallen soldiers who paid the ultimate sacrifice in defending the country's borders and national security and stability. Terrorism targeting the kingdom, he vowed, would only unite Jordanians and embolden them to counter terrorist gangs and fend off any attempt to tamper with the kingdom's security and stability. The king expressed his pride in the efforts of the army and security agencies to defend the nation and safeguard its achievements. The martyrs' families voiced appreciation for the king for providing them with all support. His Majesty received Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry, who handed him an invitation from President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to visit Cairo. During the meeting held at the Al-Husseiniya Palace, the king said Jordan maintained solid ties with Egypt and is willing to advance cooperation at various levels. The king said economic ties had made progress after a meeting in Cairo of the two countries' Joint High Committee last year. He expressed hope the committee's next meeting in Amman later this year will further help to expand relations. The meeting also dealt with the upcoming Arab Summit in Amman, which will be held amid extraordinary challenges posed to the Arab world that required close coordination. They also discussed regional developments including Syria, Iraq, Libya and Yemen, as well as the peace process and Jerusalem. Prime Minister Hani Molki told the Egyptian Foreign Minister Egypt is a strategic depth for Jordan and the kingdom is keen to enhance ties with Cairo. Molki said the changes in the world require closer coordination with the Arab world for the good of the region and its peoples. They also discussed a recent Jordanian decision to regulate the labor market. In this context, the Prime Minister said a 2-month notice will be given to Egyptian workers in the kingdom who have no work permits to correct their status. At a joint press conference, Minister of Foreign and Expatriate Affairs Ayman Safadi and his Egyptian counterpart Sameh Shoukry to discuss ties and preparations to host an upcoming Arab Summit in Amman in late March. The two countries' top diplomats also spoke about promoting joint Arab action and cooperation to face common challenges including terrorism. Safadi said Jordan is cooperating with Egypt to defeat terrorism and its dark ideology, which requires security and military coordination. He said Jordan is working to ensure that upcoming Arab Summit will be a milestone in addressing the various common Arab issues. Safadi said the Palestinian issue is Jordan's top priority, and the kingdom condemns any unilateral moves that would undermine the two-state solution and any attempt to change the status quo in Jerusalem and threaten the Arab and Muslim identity of the Holy City. The State Security Court handed down jail terms of 6 to 8 years against 8 defendants convicted of promoting the ideology of Daesh terrorist group. The court sentenced 2 defendants to 8 years in prison and another 2 to 7 years with hard labor. 3 others were handed jail terms of 7 years. The eighth was sentenced to a 6-year jail term. The court has recently begun stiffening the penalty against proponents of the Daesh ideology of terrorism. Senate President Faisal Al-Faiz held talks with United Arab Emirates UAE Federal National Council President Amal Al-Qubaisi, in which they underlined the deep political, economic and social relations between the two countries. Faez stressed the importance of further cementing ties, referring to a series of meetings and contacts that His Majesty King Abdullah was holding with the UAE Vice President, Prime Minister and ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, and ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, to maintain cooperation and consultation between the two countries. Qubaisi pointed to the advanced level achieved in the UAE-Jordanian relations in various fields and lauded the kingdom for hosting Syrian refugees and supporting pan-Arab causes. She said the United Arab Emirates stands by Jordan and it supports its security and stability. Syrian rebels backed by the Turkish military have captured the outskirts of the Daesh-held town of the Al-Bab in northern Syria. Turkey has also presented a detailed plan to drive Daesh terrorist group out of its Raqqa stronghold in northern Syria. The top U.S. commander in Iraq said he believes U.S.-backed forces will recapture Daesh's last two major strongholds in Syria and Iraq within the next 6 months. Here's more.
The U.S. military signaled the Daesh stronghold of Al-Raqqa in Syria and Mosul in Iraq will be recaptured in 6 months' time. Colonel John Dorian, the U.S.-led coalition spokesman, said he expects U.S.-backed forces on the ground to nearly isolate Al-Raqqa in northern Syria in the coming weeks. The statement sets the stage for a push to seize the city, but Dorian did not give a timeline.
What we would expect is that within the next few weeks, the city will be nearly completely isolated, and then there will be a decision point to move in. We're not going to give the exact timing of the effort to seize the city.
The remark comes as the fight against Daesh in war-torn Syria intensifies. Government forces backed by Russia have made fresh progress and took over farmland around the village of Al-Tayyas, 50 kilometers west of Palmyra. They also targeted Daesh near T4 Air Base in Homs, one of the largest military air bases in the country. Troops fired heavy machine guns as they advanced, supported by military helicopters. Turkish-backed Syrian rebel forces have also taken control of the outer district of Al-Bab. The Battle of Al-Bab has raised the prospects of a confrontation between the Turkish military and the Syrian army, which has pushed to within a few kilometers of the city's southern outskirts. The Turkish Prime Minister said Ankara has been taking necessary measures to avoid such a confrontation.
The outer districts of the town have been brought under control, and the operation to take the Al-Bab under full control is underway. It's true that the Syrian forces are taking actions from the south towards the north of Al-Bab, but as a result of our coordination with the coalition forces and Russia, we are taking the necessary precautions to avoid possible clashes.
The Turkish military said that 58 Daesh militants were killed in airstrikes, artillery fire and clashes. Syrian government forces and allied militia have mounted their own rapid advance towards Al-Bab in the last few weeks. Rana Hassan for the news at 10.
Human rights groups petitioned the Israeli Supreme Court against a new internationally condemned law legalizing settler homes built on private Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank. But Deputy Israeli Foreign Minister Tzivi Hotovili defended the law, which he called fair and just. The legislation, which retroactively sanctions about 4,000 settler homes built on privately owned Palestinian land, has drawn worldwide condemnation. However, legal communities say the law will likely not pass since it is subject to judicial challenge. Lawyer Suhad Bishara of the Adala Human Rights Group said her organization has asked the court to give an injunction against the law. Attorney Talia Sasson, president of the New Israeli Fund, as well as former parliament candidate, said the Israeli parliament had no jurisdiction over the occupied West Bank.
Basically, we are basing our petition on two main arguments. One is that the law violates the IHL, which is the legal framework that should be binding in the West Bank. Second, we are claiming that the Israeli parliament cannot enact any law that violates its constitutional values, and we think that this law is unconstitutional.
The state of Israel, when we are talking about Israel, have no sovereignty over there, and the Israeli law is not applying there according to the Israeli government and Knesset. So how come that the Knesset could legislate a law that applies there? If the Knesset can legislate law that applies in the West Bank, why can't it legislate laws that applies in London or Paris?
The United Nations said 12 million people in Yemen face the threat of famine brought on by 2 years of civil war, and the situation is rapidly deteriorating. It appealed for $2.1 billion to provide food and other life-saving aid, saying that Yemen's economy and institutions are collapsing and its infrastructure has been devastated. Here's more.
Asking for $2.1 billion to save the lives of 12 million people in Yemen. The United Nations appealing for funds on Wednesday to provide food to those facing famine. The UN says nearly 3.3 million people, 2.1 million of them children, are acutely malnourished. Yemen's been divided by nearly 2 years of civil war, a conflict which pits the Iran-allied Houthi group against a Sunni Arab coalition led by Saudi Arabia. At least 10,000 people have been killed in the fighting. Ongoing airstrikes are also damaging ports, roads, bridges and markets.
Fishermen can't fish, farmers can't farm, civil servants don't get paid. So the ability for them to cope with that crisis has been exacerbated by the conflict. And so what you have is people having to make life and death decisions. Do you feed your child or your children, or do you pay for medical treatment for the sick child? And that's a daily call for many families.
UNICEF says about 63,000 Yemeni children died last year of preventable causes, often linked to malnutrition. Meanwhile, conflicting reports on Wednesday over the government's position on US raids targeting al-Qaeda militants. The New York Times reporting that Yemen's withdrawn permission for US special operations ground missions on its soil. A nighttime raid on the 29th of January, approved by new President Donald Trump, saw a Navy SEAL and civilians killed. A Yemeni official, though, told Reuters they've expressed concern but stopped short of a ban, saying there needs to be more coordination with the Yemeni authorities before any action.
Pope Francis said society should not create walls but bridges to encourage good relations among people. Speaking at his weekly general audience, the Pope spoke of a Christian calling to not raise walls but bridges, to not respond to evil with evil, to overcome evil with good. Pope Francis also issued a stinging criticism of atrocities against Myanmar's minority Rohingya Muslims. He said they have been tortured and killed simply because they want to live their culture and their Muslim faith. The Pope issued his strong defense of the Rohingyas following last week's devastating UN report that said security forces in the north of the country had carried out mass killings, gang rapes, and had burned villages. President Donald Trump stepped up his criticism of the U.S. judicial system at a meeting with law enforcement officials, saying courts seem to be so political. This came a day after his U.S. travel ban on people from 7 Muslim-majority countries faced close scrutiny from an appeals court. A 3-judge panel of the San Francisco-based 9th U.S. Circuit's Court of Appeals yesterday heard arguments on the Trump administration's challenge to a lower court order, putting his temporary travel ban on hold. The appeals court must decide if Trump acted within his authority or whether his directive was tantamount to a discriminatory ban targeting Muslims.
And I don't ever want to call a court biased, so I won't call it biased. And we haven't had a decision yet. But courts seem to be so political, and it would be so great for our justice system if they would be able to read a statement and do what's right. And that has to do with the security of our country, which is so important.
A dream car collection of vintage cars and motorcycles were presented in Paris ahead of a Bonhams auction. It coincides with the Retromobile Week, a fair that has made Paris a car collector's capital. Over 100 cars produced over a period ranging from the turn of the last century to the 1990s, including a 1935 Aston Martin and a 1955 Mercedes-Benz, were on display under the stately glass roof of the Grand Palais. The auction will take place tomorrow afternoon and expects a full house, with some bids to be made over telephone. South Korea unveiled a countdown clock for the Winter Olympics in Seoul to mark 1 year until the Pyeongchang Games. The official timekeeper, Omega, established a digital clock tower in front of Seoul's City Hall. Omega held a ceremony unveiling the clock and marking the 1 year countdown to the start of the 2018 Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang will be held tomorrow. The clock is 4 meters wide and 4.3 meters tall. Bayern Munich captain Philipp Lahm, one of the most decorated players in world football, will retire at the end of the season. According to the report, Lahm will retire in the summer and will not take up a position at the club as a sporting director. Lahm has won everything in the game, including 6 German Cups and leading Bayern to the 2013 Champions League title. However, his crowning moment was winning the 2014 World Cup in Brazil as Germany's captain. He retired from international football shortly afterwards. And finally, the weather forecast. It will be cold tonight in the hilly areas, Badia and eastern plains, with low clouds and a slight chance for drizzles. The Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea can also expect a relatively cold night. Tomorrow it will remain cold across the kingdom, with a drop in temperature and scattered showers. Winds will be northwesterly to brisk. The Gulf Aqaba should expect a cool day tomorrow, with high clouds, northerly winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close here, our top stories once again. His Majesty receives an invitation from Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to visit Cairo. Human rights groups petition the Israeli Supreme Court against a new law legalizing settler homes in the occupied West Bank. The top U.S. commander in Iraq says he believes U.S.-backed forces will recapture Daesh's last 2 major strongholds in Syria and Iraq within the next 6 months. And with that, we come to the end of tonight's news. Thank you for joining us.